Hi, and welcome to the final module of the University Certificate in Police Leadership, week 3 of module 3. And certainly all of the modules are vitally important. This one is also pivotally important as we talk about leadership communication. As we know, the leadership research, inter alia Northhouse 2018, highlights that leaders always initiate and maintain relationship. And we spoke about the balance that leaders have to strike between task and relationship. And many leaders focus so much on the task that many times they neglect to cultivate and develop the people that they're leading who ultimately will accomplish that task. We've also said that people are not a means to an end. People are an end. And great leaders actually love the people that they're leading. And so in this final module, I want to highlight for you some of the critical components of leadership communication, something that I think sometimes leaders can really miss because they're so focused on task accomplishment that they often don't have the time or don't prioritize maybe this need for communication. I sat with a great leader a few weeks back, and the leader said, we have to ask ourselves this question. The question is, what must we do? What should we do? And then what do we choose to do? And I think that's so important when we think about this idea of communication and building relationships. And so when we think about communication, of course, again, our definition is really important. Communication is a process by which information and understanding are transferred between a sender and a receiver. And if any of you have ever studied Bell's model of communication, you know that in all communication we have this idea of a sender and a receiver. And the sender, of course, sends a message, but we know that often the message that the sender sends is not always the message that the receiver then receives. And that's because we have this kind of invisible thing in between that we call semantic interference. Semantic interference, where the meaning of what was communicated is somehow distorted on the way. And there are many examples of this we see. And so communication is really this process by which the sender sends information and the receiver receives it. And we have to be really aware of, is there understanding of the message? And so you can see this in the circular model of interpersonal communication. The message, verbal and nonverbal symbols, is sent. The receiver interprets the message and then formulates what they believe that message to be. And they then channel that message, both verbal and nonverbal. And again, you have the cycle then of feeding that back to the sender who then interprets it. And so we have to be really sure that we're clear. Clarity is vital. And we need to be sure that the receiver is hearing or receiving the intended message. So leader is a communication champion. Leaders, one of the key features of great leadership is communication. Leaders are people who philosophically are grounded in the belief that communication is essential to building trust and gaining commitment to a vision. Communication is essential to gaining trust and buy-in to the vision that you as leadership have. Trust takes a long time to build and just a moment to destroy. And so communication is so vital that people understand and make sense of why you're doing the things you're doing. You can't just assume that because you're the leader, they're going to trust that what you're doing is in their best interest and in the best interest of the organization. You need to help them make sense of that by communicating and helping them unpack some of the actions that they're seeing. And then there's this notion of embeddedness. When people throughout the organization are united around a common purpose based on a deep understanding, and there's that word again, a deep understanding and acceptance of the vision and strategy. And that comes, how does that come? Well, that comes through communication. How do we gain a deep understanding of the vision and a deep commitment? Through this idea of communication. And then sense giving. And I've started working on and developed a literature review of sense making in police leadership. Because I think one of the core vital tenets of good leadership is helping followers make sense of what's going on. And sense making occurs, sense giving occurs through communication. helping people to understand why it is that the leadership is doing what they're doing, how that interacts with the context and the contextual factors that are driving some of those actions and those decisions, and how they as followers then, in a sensible way, understanding what is going on, can really support and undergird those actions of the leadership in alignment with the vision statement of the organization. And so it's really, really important that communication is developed and overt. So when we think about the leader as a communication champion, we want to develop strategic conversations. We want to build an open climate. And remember, this goes back to our previous module on setting the organizational culture. Do we have an organizational culture that's open, that's transparent, where people feel that there's nothing hidden and that they can actually ask questions without being judged? That there is a sense of listening, active listening. Not just that I'm hearing so that I can respond, but actually hearing to understand your perspective. That there's candor, that people can express, that we actually embrace and welcome constructive dissent rather than always seeking destructive consent. Very, very important. And that there's dialogue, that I may not always agree with you, but I'm going to hear you and I want to understand you, and that brings us closer together. And the power of stories. Stories are so very powerful. And often we can help people gain understanding by telling those stories that give sense and meaning. In Africa, we use stories all the time. We're very narrative driven, and it helps us make sense. And there is so much research now that shows how important storytelling is to good leadership. Nelson Mandela, Madiba, told tremendous stories of great achievements and of things that were done by people as they sought freedom in apartheid South Africa. And then the leader as communication champion, looking at these internal and external sources, directs attention of the people to the vision and values and the desired outcomes using persuasion. This is where we're going, and this is why we're going there, and this is how we need to get there. And let me help you see that. And so we methodologically use rich channels, both verbal and nonverbal communication, and continual use of those. And then we use this thing called strategic conversations, communication that takes place across boundaries and hierarchical levels about the group or organization's vision, critical strategic themes and values that can help to achieve desired outcomes. One of the organizations I belong to, every month, the president of that organization invites everyone in the organization to come and sit around and have an open table discussion. And so there's a sense of openness, there's a sense of access, and of course it generates tremendous trust as that occurs. And so it occurs across hierarchical boundaries. As a police leader, I understand that as a paramilitary organization, there are hierarchical structures, but one of the things you really want to be aware of is how do I communicate and how do I create these channels of communication where everybody feels included and understands what's going on, and that there is this openness in communication. Well, how do I lead a strategic conversation? Rather than telling, I should be asking. Questions are so powerful. And if we can learn to ask the right questions and then actively listen to people's responses, and that's one of the key reasons we have those discussion questions in this course, because we want to probe, and then we want you to share your perspectives and hear the perspectives of others and engage in those. And that's a practice we're hoping that you will develop in your leadership approach and your leadership style. There's real intentionality to that, and that's why we've designed it that way. We want to understand not only people's words, but also their attitudes and their values, those things that are below the surface that we don't often see. We can hear when we're asking questions and listening actively. We also want to understand people's personal goals. That's individualized consideration in transformational leadership, and people's desires. Who are you, and what is it that you're passionate about, and how can we help you to achieve that in this organization? We want to set the agenda for the conversation by underscoring the key strategic themes that are linked to organizational success. As we embark on this journey together, we remind one another of what is important, and then we select the right communication channels to facilitate dialogue. And we know that email is not always the best channel for dialogue, and that's why so often we need face-to-face interaction. Open communication is where leaders share all types of information throughout the company or throughout the police organization. And I want you to see this, very important, across all levels. It's so vital that this information is shared across all levels. You can read through this. Number one, you get what you talk about. Number two, the climate of an organization is a reflection of the leader and how you communicate. And number three, you can walk faster than one step at a time. A vision is neither understood nor accepted overnight. And that's why we have to communicate, and then help people make sense of that vision and the actions that undergird it and support it. Well, what are the benefits of an open communication climate? And they are as follows. Number one, they help alleviate tension. When people understand why you're doing what you're doing and how that aligns with the vision and what the contextual variations are that are driving some of those decisions, it alleviates tension and conflict. They feel part of the whole, and they feel like a team working together to address a common issue and a common problem. Secondarily, it builds trust. I know that you're not hiding things, that you're openly communicating about these things, and so I can trust you. It reaffirms the value of the employee, and I really want to highlight this, and then their commitment to a shared vision. And finally, it makes the company more competitive. There are many, many more advantages to communication as a leader. I want to end off by just again urging you to think about, as a leader, how do I communicate, and maybe enhance and develop your communication profile and portfolio as a leader. It will be one of the strongest leadership acuities that you develop. Thank you so much.